In a bustling city known for its vibrant culture and complex politics, a high-ranking official named Jonathan Prescott found himself at the center of a chaotic mix-up that would turn his life upside down. Jonathan was a respected figure, well regarded for his work in public service, and known for advocating for transparency and accountability in government. However, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, he was mistakenly arrested by the police in a high-stakes operation targeting a notorious crime syndicate. The arrest stemmed from a miscommunication that linked Jonathan's name to a list of individuals involved in an ongoing investigation. As he was leaving a meeting with city planners, the sound of sirens and the sight of police cars surrounding him became a stark reality. Officers leapt out of their vehicles, shouting commands as they rushed towards him. Initially believing it to be a misunderstanding, Jonathan complied with their requests, hoping to clarify the situation quickly. "Sir, you're under arrest for conspiracy and corruption," one officer stated, handcuffing him as bystanders gasped in disbelief. The flash of cameras from reporters gathered nearby added to the surreal nature of the event. Jonathan felt a wave of confusion wash over him. He had dedicated his career to public service, and the notion of being involved in criminal activity was completely unfathomable. Taken to the police station, Jonathan was led through a series of dark hallways, his mind racing with questions. How could this happen? What would his family think? How would this affect his career? As he sat in a cold interrogation room, he tried to collect his thoughts. The officers began their questioning, but Jonathan remained calm, insisting on his innocence and the misunderstanding at hand. Hours passed, and as the police conducted their investigations, Jonathan used the time to strategize his next moves. He knew he needed to act quickly to protect his reputation. After what felt like an eternity, the police finally acknowledged the error. They had confused him with a suspect who shared a similar name. The relief was palpable, but Jonathan's troubles were far from over. The news of his arrest had already spread like wildfire. Headlines flashed across news stations, painting a picture of scandal and corruption. Despite being cleared of all charges, Jonathan was acutely aware that the damage to his reputation had already been done. The media frenzy painted him as a criminal, and the public's perception shifted dramatically. Determined not to let this incident define him, Jonathan decided to take action. He gathered a team of advisors and legal experts to strategize his next steps. They brainstormed ways to address the media narrative and restore his reputation. Jonathan knew he had to be proactive. Simply waiting for the public to forget about the incident was not an option. He initiated a press conference, determined to set the record straight. Standing before a throng of reporters, Jonathan spoke with conviction. "I stand before you today not as a criminal, but as a public servant wronged by an unfortunate mistake. My dedication to this city and its citizens has never wavered. I will not allow this miscommunication to overshadow my commitment to serving the public." The conference garnered mixed reactions. While some media outlets supported his stance, others remained skeptical, questioning how someone in his position could be so easily misidentified. Nevertheless, Jonathan remained steadfast, using the platform to advocate for changes in police procedures to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. In the days following the press conference, Jonathan began receiving messages of support from colleagues, friends, and even some unexpected allies. He was invited to speak at community events, where he shared his experience and advocated for transparency in law enforcement. This outreach not only allowed him to connect with the community, but also helped to slowly rebuild his reputation. As the weeks passed, Jonathan began to notice a shift in public sentiment. People who once viewed him with suspicion were now eager to hear his side of the story. His open discussions about the flaws in the system resonated with many who had felt similarly wronged or misrepresented in the past. He highlighted the importance of accountability, not just within law enforcement, but across all levels of government. Jonathan's efforts culminated in a public forum he organized to address police accountability and community relations. He invited police officials, community leaders, and citizens to engage in an open dialogue. The event was well attended, and the atmosphere was charged with energy as people from all walks of life gathered to discuss solutions to the issues that had been exacerbated by his arrest. During the forum, Jonathan posed thought-provoking questions that prompted participants to think critically about their roles in shaping community safety and justice. How can we work together to ensure that our police departments are held accountable to the communities they serve, he asked, igniting discussions that spanned various perspectives. The forum was not without its tensions, as some attendees expressed their frustrations and concerns about police practices. However, Jonathan remained committed to fostering a respectful environment for dialogue. He believed that real change could only occur through collaboration and understanding. By the end of the event, attendees were sharing ideas and proposing initiatives that could bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. Meanwhile, Jonathan's legal team had been working diligently behind the scenes. They initiated discussions with the police department regarding policy changes to prevent future wrongful arrests. After several meetings, they proposed a series of reforms, including improved communication protocols and enhanced training for officers regarding the verification of identities before making arrests. As Jonathan continued his advocacy, he faced challenges along the way. There were those who continued to question his motives, suggesting that he was merely trying to salvage his reputation. But Jonathan remained undeterred, recognizing that the fight for justice and accountability extended beyond his personal experience. He was advocating for a systemic change that would benefit countless others who may find themselves in similar situations. With his efforts gaining traction, Jonathan began to attract the attention of local and national organizations focused on police reform. They reached out to him, eager to collaborate on initiatives that aimed to address systemic issues within law enforcement. Jonathan embraced these opportunities, recognizing that the coalition would strengthen their voices and amplify their message. The momentum continued to build, and Jonathan found himself at the forefront of a growing movement for police reform. He was invited to speak at conferences and panels, sharing his experience and advocating for comprehensive changes to the justice system. With each engagement, he emphasized the need for accountability, transparency, and community involvement in shaping law enforcement practices. In addition to his public speaking engagements, Jonathan penned an opinion piece for a prominent newspaper, detailing his experience and calling for a reevaluation of policing practices. The piece garnered significant attention, sparking conversations across the nation. Readers resonated with his story, and many began sharing their own experiences of wrongful arrest and mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement. The response to Jonathan's article was overwhelming. Letters of support poured in, as did calls for action from various advocacy groups. Recognizing the potential for a larger movement, Jonathan convened a summit that brought together activists, community leaders, and policymakers to discuss actionable solutions for police reform. As the summit approached, Jonathan felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. He understood the weight of responsibility that came with leading such an initiative. In his opening remarks, he shared his journey candidly, illustrating the human impact of systemic failures. "This is not just about me. It's about all of us," he emphasized. "We have a unique opportunity to create a justice system that works for everyone." The discussions during the summit were dynamic, with participants brainstorming ideas for reforms and ways to engage the community in shaping policing practices. The energy in the room was palpable, as attendees exchanged stories and visions for a better future. Amidst the productive discussions, Jonathan recognized that there was still much work to be done. He remained focused on the long-term vision of creating a justice system rooted in accountability and community trust. He envisioned a world where no one would have to endure the humiliation and fear he experienced during his wrongful arrest. As the summit concluded, participants left inspired and motivated to continue the work. Jonathan received numerous commitments from attendees to engage in advocacy efforts and push for changes within their own communities. The movement was growing, and with each passing day, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. In the months that followed, Jonathan continued to work tirelessly alongside community members and activists, pushing for policy changes at local and state levels. Their collective efforts began to yield results. Proposals for police accountability measures gained traction among lawmakers, and discussions about systemic reforms became commonplace in political circles. Despite the progress, Jonathan remained aware of the challenges ahead. Opposition from some law enforcement factions persisted, and there were those who sought to undermine the movement. However, he was determined to stand firm, believing that the tide was turning in favor of justice and accountability. One day, while preparing for another round of meetings with lawmakers, Jonathan received a call from a well-known journalist who wanted to feature his story in a national magazine. They were interested in highlighting not just his experience, but also the broader movement for police reform that had emerged in its wake. Feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness, Jonathan agreed to the interview, recognizing the opportunity to reach an even larger audience. During their conversation, he spoke passionately about the importance of community engagement and the need for systemic change. "This isn't just my story. It's a reflection of what so many others have faced," he explained. "We must work together to ensure that every voice is heard and valued." As the article was published, Jonathan's profile grew, and he found himself increasingly in demand as a speaker and advocate. Invitations poured in from organizations and events across the country. With each appearance, he continued to advocate for police accountability and reforms, drawing from his own experiences and the stories of those he had met along the way. Through his unwavering commitment and the collective efforts of the movement, Jonathan began to see tangible changes. Some law enforcement agencies adopted new policies focused on community engagement, while others implemented training programs aimed at preventing wrongful arrests. The momentum was shifting, and with it, hope began to blossom in communities that had long felt marginalized. Jonathan's work was far from over, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. He knew that every step forward, no matter how small, contributed to a larger vision of justice and accountability. As he continued his advocacy, Jonathan remained focused on the ultimate goal: creating a world where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel safe and protected by those sworn to serve and defend them. As Jonathan Prescott continued his advocacy, he delved deeper into the intricacies of the justice system, seeking to understand not just the surface issues, but the systemic problems that led to wrongful arrests and distrust between law enforcement and the community. He immersed himself in research, attending seminars, and engaging with experts in criminal justice reform, eager to learn how to effectively navigate the political landscape and push for meaningful change. With each new piece of information, Jonathan refined his approach. He realized that to create real, lasting reform, it was essential to gather data and evidence that could support their calls for change. Partnering with local universities, he initiated research projects to collect statistics on wrongful arrests, racial profiling, and community police relations. This data would serve as a foundation for their advocacy efforts, enabling them to present a compelling case to lawmakers and the public. Jonathan also recognized the importance of engaging with the media. He established a communication strategy to ensure that their message reached a broader audience. He created a dedicated website for the movement, featuring resources, personal stories, and updates on their initiatives. Social media became a powerful tool for amplifying their message, allowing supporters to share their experiences and connect with one another. As the movement gained traction, Jonathan organized a series of town hall meetings throughout the city, inviting residents to share their concerns, experiences, and suggestions. These meetings not only fostered community engagement, but also allowed Jonathan to hear firsthand the challenges people faced within the justice system. He was often moved by the stories shared. Tales of harassment, wrongful accusations, and the long-lasting impacts of being caught in the web of an unforgiving system. In one particularly emotional meeting, a young woman named Maria recounted her experience of being wrongfully detained for several hours. Her voice trembled as she described the humiliation and fear she felt during that time. "I thought I was going to lose everything. My job, my reputation," she said, tears welling in her eyes. Jonathan felt a deep sense of empathy for Maria and all those who had suffered similar fates. Her story reinforced his belief that their fight was about more than just policy reform. It was about restoring dignity and justice to individuals who had been wronged. Motivated by the stories he heard, Jonathan decided to launch a campaign called Voices of the Wronged. The initiative aimed to collect personal accounts from individuals who had experienced wrongful arrests or police misconduct. These stories would be shared through social media, public forums, and community events to raise awareness and galvanize support for reform. Jonathan believed that by putting real faces to the issue, they could humanize the statistics, and statistics would become powerful tools in their advocacy. As the campaign unfolded, Jonathan received an overwhelming response. People from various backgrounds began to reach out, eager to share their experiences and join the movement. Each story added depth and urgency to their cause, highlighting the widespread nature of the problem. With the support of a dedicated team, Jonathan compiled these narratives into a powerful report that would be used to advocate for policy changes at the municipal and state levels. In tandem with the campaign, Jonathan continued to engage with lawmakers. He sought out allies within the political sphere, those who had shown a willingness to listen and support reform efforts. He built relationships with key figures in the local government, organizing meetings where he could present the findings from their research and the powerful stories from Voices of the Wronged. One such meeting was scheduled with a prominent city council member known for her commitment to social justice. Jonathan prepared meticulously, ensuring he could articulate the urgency of the issue and the need for immediate reform. On the day of the meeting, he arrived early, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. He understood the stakes. This was an opportunity to advocate for change at the highest levels of local government. When the council member arrived, Jonathan greeted her warmly and quickly introduced his team. They began the presentation, showcasing the data they had collected and the personal accounts from the campaign. As Jonathan spoke passionately about the need for accountability and reform, he noticed the council members' expression shift from skepticism to concern. "This data is alarming," she said after hearing a few stories. "It's clear we have a systemic issue that needs addressing." Jonathan felt a surge of hope. This was the kind of response he had been hoping for. The conversation evolved into a collaborative discussion on potential legislative solutions, and Jonathan sensed they were making progress. Encouraged by the meeting, Jonathan and his team began drafting proposals for reforms that could be presented to the city council. They focused on measures such as enhanced training for police officers on de-escalation tactics and cultural competency, the establishment of independent oversight boards to investigate complaints against law enforcement, and community engagement initiatives to foster trust between police and residents. However, not everyone was on board with the proposed changes. Some members of the police department expressed resistance, arguing that the suggested reforms undermined their authority and would hamper their ability to maintain order. Tensions escalated during a subsequent public meeting where Jonathan presented their proposals to the city council. A group of police officers stood in opposition, voicing their concerns about how the reforms would impact their work. Faced with pushback, Jonathan remained composed and respectful. He understood that change was rarely easy, especially when it involved questioning established practices. Instead of engaging in a heated debate, he opened the floor for dialogue, inviting the officers to share their perspectives while emphasizing the importance of community trust and accountability. "We all want a safer community," Jonathan said, addressing the audience. "But we need to acknowledge that safety must be built on trust, transparency, and accountability. These reforms are not meant to vilify our law enforcement officers. Rather, they are designed to empower them and enhance the relationship between police and the community." The meeting continued, with voices from both sides contributing to the discussion. While it was clear that not everyone would agree, Jonathan felt encouraged by the willingness of some officers to engage in a constructive dialogue. It became evident that fostering understanding would be a critical part of the reform process. As the weeks went on, Jonathan's efforts began to show promise. Community engagement initiatives were launched, creating opportunities for police officers and residents to interact in positive settings. Events such as community picnics, town hall discussions, and workshops on conflict resolution allowed both parties to share experiences and build relationships based on mutual respect. Through these efforts, Jonathan saw the seeds of change being planted. People began to speak of the police not as adversaries, but as partners in ensuring community safety. The narrative was slowly shifting, and Jonathan felt a renewed sense of hope as the movement gained momentum. But even as progress was made, challenges loomed on the horizon. As discussions around police reform intensified, Jonathan received threats and pushback from individuals who felt threatened by the changes. Some critics launched smear campaigns, attempting to discredit his efforts and undermine his credibility. Yet Jonathan refused to be discouraged. He continued to lean on his support network of friends, family, and allies within the movement. He reminded himself that every significant change comes with its share of challenges. Drawing strength from the stories of those who had shared their experiences, he pushed forward, undeterred by the obstacles in his path. During this tumultuous time, Jonathan found solace in his personal life. He reconnected with his family, who had stood by him throughout the ordeal. Their unwavering support reminded him of why he was fighting for reform in the first place. They often spent evenings together discussing his work, offering their perspectives and encouragement, which bolstered his resolve. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Jonathan's daughter, Emma, asked him a thoughtful question. "Dad, why do you keep fighting for this? It seems really hard." Her innocence struck a chord with him, and he realized the weight of the responsibility he carried. He wanted to ensure a safer world for her and for all children, free from the fear of injustice. "Emma," he replied gently, "because change doesn't come easily, and it often requires people to stand up for what is right. I want to make sure that everyone feels safe and treated fairly, including you. It's worth it, even when it's tough." With a renewed sense of purpose, Jonathan returned to his advocacy work with vigor. He organized a series of public forums aimed at educating the community about their rights and the importance of holding law enforcement accountable. These sessions drew significant attendance, with residents eager to learn how to navigate interactions with police and advocate for themselves. The momentum was palpable as Jonathan continued to push for reform. Lawmakers began to take notice of the grassroots movement, and some even reached out for collaboration. Jonathan was invited to speak at legislative sessions, where he presented the data and personal accounts that had become the cornerstone of their advocacy. As support grew, Jonathan felt a wave of determination. He could see the possibility of actual policy changes on the horizon. The public was becoming more engaged, and the momentum behind police reform was palpable. Yet, he remained mindful of the complexities involved. He knew that achieving lasting change required more than just political support. It demanded a cultural shift within law enforcement agencies and communities alike. Throughout this journey, Jonathan continued to learn and adapt. He met with experts in community organizing, psychology, and conflict resolution to better understand how to navigate the nuances of reform. He was determined to ensure that the movement was inclusive and that the voices of those most affected by the justice system were at the forefront. As the movement gained traction, Jonathan's story became a catalyst for others. Individuals from different cities began to reach out, sharing their own experiences of injustice and seeking advice on how to start similar advocacy initiatives. Inspired by his work, they wanted to affect change in their own communities. Jonathan began to travel, attending events and speaking engagements across the country. He forged connections with activists and leaders who shared his vision of a more just society. In these spaces, he found camaraderie and inspiration, united by a common purpose that transcended geographical boundaries. During one of these trips, Jonathan attended a national conference focused on police reform. He was energized by the collective passion of the attendees, each of whom brought unique insights and experiences. The event featured panel discussions, workshops, and opportunities for networking, and Jonathan was eager to soak it all in. He found himself in a workshop titled Building Bridges, Community and Police Relations, where activists and former law enforcement officers shared strategies for fostering cooperation. Listening to their stories reinforced his belief that collaboration was essential for meaningful change. The session ended with an interactive discussion, and Jonathan eagerly contributed his insights. "I think it's crucial to create spaces where both sides can come together," he suggested. "We need to acknowledge past grievances while also focusing on building trust for the future. How can we implement programs that encourage ongoing dialogue?" The workshop leaders nodded in agreement, and Jonathan felt a sense of validation. It was a reminder that he was not alone in this fight. There were countless others who shared his vision and were equally dedicated to fostering a better relationship between police and communities. As Jonathan returned home from the conference, he felt invigorated and equipped with new ideas. He shared his experiences with his team, and together they began to brainstorm ways to implement some of the successful strategies discussed at the event. They set ambitious goals for the upcoming months, determined to sustain the momentum of their movement. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan and his team rolled out a series of initiatives designed to deepen community engagement and enhance police accountability. They organized workshops where community members could learn about their rights, meet local law enforcement officers, and discuss their concerns openly. These events proved to be transformative, as participants began to see officers as individuals rather than faceless authority figures. Jonathan was heartened to witness the shift in attitudes, as both police and community members began to engage in meaningful conversations. As the movement continued to grow, Jonathan knew that they were on the precipice of significant change. However, he remained vigilant, aware that setbacks were a natural part of any reform effort. There were still skeptics who questioned the need for change, and he anticipated that resistance would persist. But Jonathan was not deterred. He had come too far and witnessed too much to back down now. He drew strength from the community that had rallied around the cause, and he was inspired by the resilience of those who had shared their stories. They had all faced adversity, yet they stood united in the pursuit of justice. With each passing day, Jonathan continued to champion the cause of reform. He remained steadfast in his commitment to fostering understanding, accountability, and positive change within the justice system. The road ahead was long, but he believed that together, they could make a difference, one conversation and one reform at a time. That as Jonathan navigated the complexities of advocacy, he often reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The initial moment of being wrongfully arrested had been a turning point, leading him down a path he could never have imagined. It had ignited a fire within him, propelling him to fight for justice not only for himself, but for all those who had been wronged. Through the highs and lows, Jonathan remained dedicated to the work ahead. He knew that the fight for justice was ongoing and that real change required sustained effort. He continued to push boundaries, challenge norms, and rally the community around the cause. With each passing day, Jonathan's resolve deepened as he faced new challenges and opportunities. He understood that while their advocacy was gaining traction, the real test lay in the implementation of reforms that could transform the justice system. He recognized the importance of patience and persistence, knowing that lasting change would not come overnight. Jonathan spent considerable time strategizing with his team, setting measurable goals to assess their progress. They organized regular meetings to review their initiatives and plan future actions. This collaborative approach fostered a sense of unity and purpose among the group. Everyone was committed to the mission, and their shared experiences only strengthened their bond. One afternoon, as they gathered in their makeshift office, a small community center that had become their headquarters, Jonathan laid out the next phase of their campaign. "We need to focus on building relationships with local businesses and community organizations," he explained. "If we can engage more community stakeholders, we can create a coalition that supports our goals." His team nodded in agreement. They brainstormed ways to approach local leaders and business owners, emphasizing the mutual benefits of their initiatives. By collaborating with the community, they could create a network of support that would amplify their message and enhance their impact. As the weeks rolled by, they successfully forged partnerships with several local organizations, from youth groups to social services. Each collaboration added another layer of support to their movement, and they were able to host joint events that reached a broader audience. These events became platforms for discussing issues related to police reform, community safety, and social justice. One particularly impactful event was a community forum held in a local park. Jonathan and his team invited residents, local leaders, and law enforcement officials to share their perspectives. The atmosphere was charged with energy as people voiced their concerns, hopes, and ideas. Jonathan moderated the discussion, encouraging respectful dialogue and ensuring everyone had a chance to speak. During the forum, a retired police officer named Harold shared his thoughts. "I've seen both sides of this issue," he said. "When I was on the force, I witnessed the importance of community trust. It's essential for officers to feel supported, but that trust has to be mutual. I believe we can rebuild that trust through open conversations like these." His words resonated with many attendees, illustrating the complexity of the situation. Jonathan seized the moment, reinforcing the message that real change required collaboration and understanding from all parties involved. He encouraged attendees to consider how they could support one another in building a safer, more just community. As the movement gained momentum, Jonathan faced the inevitable challenges that come with advocacy. He encountered resistance from various factions, including some who felt threatened by the prospect of reform. There were heated debates on social media and attempts to discredit the movement's goals. Yet, instead of retreating in the face of opposition, Jonathan chose to engage with critics directly. He organized a series of dialogues, inviting those who disagreed with their approach to come together and share their concerns. These gatherings were often tense, but they provided a space for honest discussions. Jonathan found that many of the skeptics were open to conversation when given the opportunity to express their views. "I understand that change is difficult," Jonathan would say during these meetings. "But we have to acknowledge that our current system isn't perfect. The goal here isn't to vilify anyone. It's about creating a system that works for everyone." As these conversations unfolded, some individuals began to shift their perspectives. They recognized the validity of the concerns raised by the community and began to see the potential benefits of reform. Jonathan noted these changes with cautious optimism. They were small victories, but they mattered. In the midst of these dialogues, Jonathan remained committed to his core mission. He continued to gather data, refine proposals, and engage with lawmakers. As the legislative session approached, he felt a sense of urgency to ensure that their proposed reforms were presented in a compelling way. He spent countless hours preparing for meetings with city council members and state representatives, determined to make the case for change. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Jonathan found himself reflecting on the progress they had made. He recalled the initial shock of being wrongfully arrested and how that experience had ignited his passion for justice. It was remarkable to think how far he had come and the connections he had forged along the way. However, he also recognized that the journey was far from over. The work ahead would require sustained effort and resilience. Jonathan understood that advocacy was not a sprint, but a marathon, and he was committed to seeing it through. As the legislative session began, Jonathan and his team prepared for a crucial hearing where they would present their proposals to the council. The day arrived, and nerves were palpable. They arrived early, reviewing their notes and rehearsing their key points. Jonathan felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, knowing that their efforts could potentially impact countless lives. When it was finally their turn to speak, Jonathan stepped forward with a steadying breath. The chamber was filled with council members, community advocates, and concerned citizens. He began by sharing the personal stories collected through Voices of the Wronged, letting the human experiences behind the statistics resonate with the audience. "Today, we stand here not just as advocates for reform, but as representatives of those whose voices have often gone unheard," Jonathan stated, his voice strong and unwavering. "We believe in a system that values accountability, transparency, and justice for all." As he spoke, he could see the expressions on the council members' faces shifting, some nodding in agreement, others deep in thought. Jonathan emphasized the importance of building trust between law enforcement and the community, advocating for reforms that would enhance training, establish independent oversight, and promote community engagement. After the presentation, a council member asked tough questions, probing the potential challenges of implementing the proposed reforms. Jonathan welcomed the questions, viewing them as opportunities to clarify their vision and demonstrate the feasibility of their initiatives. "This is not about placing blame," he explained. "It's about creating a shared vision for a safer community. These reforms will not only help rebuild trust, but also empower our officers to do their jobs effectively." The hearing continued with passionate testimonies from community members, law enforcement officials, and experts in criminal justice reform. Jonathan felt a growing sense of hope as the dialogue unfolded, sensing that they were making headway in the hearts and minds of those in power. Days turned into weeks, and the momentum behind their cause continued to grow. Jonathan and his team tirelessly advocated for their proposals, meeting with additional lawmakers and community groups. They utilized every platform available to them, from social media campaigns to public rallies, to amplify their message and galvanize support. Despite the progress, Jonathan remained acutely aware of the challenges ahead. He knew that change would not come easily, and there would be continued pushback from those resistant to reform. Yet, he found solace in the stories of resilience that surrounded him. Individuals who had faced adversity and emerged stronger, driven by a shared commitment to justice. As the weeks turned into months, Jonathan's advocacy began to bear fruit. The city council scheduled a vote on their proposals, marking a significant milestone in their journey. Jonathan felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He knew that this vote would determine the future of their movement and the potential for reform within the justice system. On the day of the vote, the atmosphere was electric. Supporters packed the council chambers, a sea of faces united in their quest for change. Jonathan felt a surge of determination as he surveyed the crowd, their collective energy fueling his resolve. When the vote was finally cast, Jonathan's heart raced. The outcome would not only shape the future of their movement, but also impact the lives of countless individuals within the community. He held his breath as the results were announced, feeling the weight of anticipation in the air. The council voted in favor of several key reforms, and cheers erupted throughout the chamber. Jonathan felt a wave of relief wash over him as he celebrated the hard-fought victory with his team and supporters. It was a moment of triumph that acknowledged the struggles and voices of those who had come before them. But Jonathan knew that this was just the beginning. While they had achieved significant milestones, the work was far from over. He remained focused on the next steps, recognizing that implementing the reforms would require continued advocacy, monitoring, and community engagement. In the wake of their victory at the city council, Jonathan and his team wasted no time in shifting their focus toward the implementation of the new reforms. They recognized that passing the legislation was just the first step. The real work lay in ensuring that these changes translated into tangible improvements within the community and the police force. Jonathan gathered his team in the community center, which had become a hub of activity for their movement. The atmosphere was a mix of excitement and determination as they brainstormed how to roll out the reforms effectively. "We need to establish clear timelines and accountability measures," Jonathan urged. "It's crucial that we keep the community informed and engaged throughout this process. Transparency will be key to maintaining trust." The team decided to create a series of community meetings where residents could learn about the reforms and voice their opinions on how they should be implemented. They planned to invite police officers and city officials to these gatherings, fostering a collaborative environment where all stakeholders could contribute to the discussion. As the first meeting approached, Jonathan felt a sense of anticipation. He knew that engaging the community was vital for the success of the reforms. The night of the meeting, they set up tables and chairs in the community center, making it welcoming and accessible. Banners with the slogan, "Building Trust Together," hung on the walls, a reminder of their shared mission. When attendees began to arrive, Jonathan felt a rush of energy. Community members filled the room, eager to learn about the changes and share their thoughts. The meeting opened with a brief presentation outlining the reforms and their intended impact. Jonathan emphasized the importance of ongoing dialogue, and the need for community input to shape the process. "Tonight is about you," he told the crowd. "We want to hear your ideas, your concerns, and your hopes for how these reforms can make our community safer and more just." After the presentation, the floor opened for discussion. Hands shot up and the room buzzed with questions and comments. A local resident named Maria spoke passionately about her experiences with law enforcement. "I want to see more officers in our neighborhoods, not just patrolling, but engaging with us," she said. "We need to feel like they are part of our community, not just enforcers." Jonathan nodded, recognizing the validity of her point. Community policing is a priority for us. We want to encourage officers to build relationships with residents, attend community events, and participate in local initiatives. Another attendee, a young activist named Marcus, raised his hand. "What about accountability? How can we ensure that these reforms are actually enforced and that officers are held responsible for their actions?" Jonathan acknowledged the concern. "That's a critical question, and one we take seriously. The reforms include the establishment of an independent review board that will oversee complaints against officers. We want to ensure that there is a clear process for accountability, one that the community can trust." As the discussion continued, the atmosphere transformed into a collaborative exchange of ideas. Participants shared their hopes, suggestions, and even their fears. Jonathan felt invigorated by the energy in the room, seeing firsthand the impact of their efforts to engage the community. Weeks passed, and the meetings continued, each one drawing larger crowds. Jonathan found himself inspired by the passion of the community members who were eager to participate in shaping the future of their neighborhood. The discussions led to the creation of focus groups that would work directly with the police department to address specific issues, such as training protocols and community outreach strategies. As they delved deeper into the implementation phase, Jonathan encountered new challenges. Not all police officers were receptive to the changes, and there was resistance from some within the department who felt threatened by the notion of increased scrutiny and accountability. Jonathan realized that overcoming this resistance would require patience and strategic communication, that he reached out to police leadership to discuss the importance of the reforms and the need for buy-in from officers at all levels. He organized a series of workshops for police personnel, inviting experts in community policing and accountability to share best practices and successful case studies. Jonathan wanted officers to see the value of the changes, not just for the community, but for their own professional development as well. During one of the workshops, Jonathan addressed a group of officers who were skeptical of the reforms. "I understand that change can be uncomfortable," he began. "But these reforms are not meant to undermine your authority. They are about empowering you to do your jobs effectively and fostering trust within the community you serve. When trust is built, it makes your work easier and more impactful." Some officers nodded, while others remained unconvinced. Jonathan knew that changing minds would take time, but he remained hopeful that continued dialogue would eventually bridge the gap between the community and the police. Meanwhile, Jonathan and his team were busy tracking the progress of the reforms. They established metrics to measure the impact of community engagement initiatives and the effectiveness of the new accountability measures. They wanted to ensure that they could demonstrate tangible results to the community, further solidifying trust and support for the movement. As months passed, they began to see signs of progress. Complaints against officers declined as community members felt more empowered to report issues. The Independent Review Board became a trusted resource for residents, offering a transparent process for addressing grievances. Community events flourished as officers actively participated, building relationships and showcasing their commitment to serving the community. Despite these victories, Jonathan remained aware of the challenges that lay ahead. There were still deep-seated tensions that needed to be addressed, particularly in marginalized neighborhoods where residents had historically faced systemic bias. He knew that true reform required ongoing commitment and vigilance. Jonathan organized a series of listening sessions specifically aimed at these communities, where residents could share their experiences and discuss their needs. He wanted to ensure that the voices of those most affected by systemic issues were heard, and that their input shaped the ongoing reform efforts. During one of these sessions, a young woman named Leah shared her story. "I've seen too many of my friends get stopped for no reason, just because of the color of their skin," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "We need to see real change, not just promises. We want to feel safe, not targeted." Her words struck a chord with Jonathan and the other attendees. He recognized that addressing these systemic issues was crucial to achieving meaningful reform. "Leah, thank you for sharing your experience," he replied. "We hear you, and we're committed to working alongside you to address these issues. This is a collective effort, and we need your input to make it effective." The sessions continued to foster open dialogue and trust, allowing community members to express their concerns and collaborate on solutions. Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose as he witnessed the strength of community voices driving the movement forward. As the movement gained momentum, media attention increased, bringing both support and scrutiny. Jonathan found himself in the spotlight, frequently interviewed by news outlets eager to cover the transformative changes taking place in their community. He embraced the opportunity to share their progress while also acknowledging the challenges that remained. In interviews, Jonathan emphasized the importance of community engagement, accountability, and collaboration. "Change doesn't happen overnight, and it requires sustained effort from all of us," he would say. "We need to continue building relationships, fostering understanding, and working towards a justice system that truly serves everyone." However, not everyone was pleased with the attention the movement was receiving. Some critics took to social media to voice their opposition, accusing Jonathan and his team of undermining law enforcement and promoting division. Jonathan recognized that backlash was part of the process, but it stung nonetheless. In response, he chose to focus on constructive dialogue rather than engaging in disputes. He reached out to some of the critics, inviting them to community meetings to discuss their concerns. "I believe in having tough conversations," he said in an interview. "We can disagree, but we need to listen to each other if we want to find common ground." Jonathan's approach of seeking out dissenting voices began to bear fruit. Some critics attended the community meetings and started to see the value in the movement's goals. While not everyone would be won over, he was encouraged by the progress made in changing a few minds. As time went on, Jonathan remained committed to his mission, navigating the complexities of advocacy and reform with resilience. He understood that every step forward was a collective achievement, fueled by the voices and experiences of the community. With each initiative launched, each dialogue facilitated, and each story shared, Jonathan felt the momentum of change building. He continued to emphasize the need for collaboration and understanding, believing that the path to justice required everyone to play a role in shaping a fair and equitable system. Through the ups and downs, Jonathan's determination remained unshakable. The journey ahead was still long, and the road to reform would not be easy. Yet, Jonathan took comfort in the knowledge that they were no longer alone in the fight for justice. They had built a movement that was alive with energy, passion, and a shared commitment to change. As the movement continued to grow, Jonathan and his team began to explore additional avenues for expanding their impact. They realized that, while they had made significant strides in engaging the community and reforming local policing practices, there were systemic issues that extended beyond law enforcement. The broader socioeconomic factors contributing to crime and distrust in the community needed to be addressed as well. One day, during a strategic planning session, Jonathan posed a question to his team. What if we broaden our focus to include social services and community development? If we want to create lasting change, we need to tackle the root causes of the issues we're facing, not just the symptoms. His team enthusiastically agreed, and they set about researching local social services, educational programs, and economic initiatives that could complement their reform efforts. They reached out to community organizations, social workers, and educators to learn more about the challenges they faced and how they could collaborate effectively. One collaboration emerged with a local youth mentorship program, which aimed to provide guidance and support to at-risk teens. Jonathan met with the program director, a passionate woman named Angela, who had dedicated her life to helping young people navigate difficult circumstances. We need to create pathways for these kids, Angela explained. Many of them come from environments where they don't see a future for themselves. We can change that narrative together. Inspired by Angela's vision, Jonathan proposed a joint initiative that would connect youth in the mentorship program with opportunities to engage with local law enforcement in positive settings. They envisioned community events where officers could interact with the youth in a non-confrontational environment, building trust and rapport. With a shared commitment, Jonathan and Angela organized a series of events, sports days, art workshops, and career fairs, designed to foster positive relationships between young people and police officers. The events became a platform for collaboration, encouraging open dialogue and community engagement. As the events unfolded, Jonathan saw firsthand the impact of their efforts. At a recent basketball game, he watched as officers cheered for local youth competing on the court. The laughter and camaraderie filled the air, a stark contrast to the tensions that had previously characterized the community police relationship. Young people began to approach officers with questions, curious about their roles and experiences. "Hey, Officer Davis, what made you want to be a police officer?" a teenager named Malik asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. Officer Davis smiled, leaning down to Malik's level. "I wanted to make a difference in my community. I grew up around here, and I know how important it is to have people you can trust." Malik nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. It's cool to see you guys out here with us." Jonathan felt a surge of hope as he witnessed the conversations unfolding. These interactions were exactly what he had envisioned, creating a space where relationships could blossom and misunderstandings could be addressed. Meanwhile, Jonathan continued to monitor the progress of the police reforms they had implemented. He met regularly with the Independent Review Board to discuss trends and complaints and how the department was responding to community concerns. Transparency was paramount, and Jonathan ensured that the board provided regular updates to the community. During one of the review meetings, Jonathan listened intently as board members reported a significant decrease in complaints related to excessive force. "This is encouraging," he said. "It indicates that the training and community engagement efforts are making a difference. We need to keep pushing for improvement and ensure that officers feel supported in their roles." As the months turned into a year, the momentum of the movement showed no signs of slowing down. Jonathan and his team remained committed to building on their successes while continuing to address the challenges that lay ahead. They organized regular community forums, ensuring that residents had a voice in the ongoing reform process. During one forum, a resident named Gerald shared his experiences with the justice system. "I've been in and out of court for years, and it feels like I'm just another number. We need to humanize this process," he said, his frustration evident. "Too often, it feels like we're treated like criminals before we even get a chance to speak." Jonathan nodded, recognizing the need for systemic change in the judicial process as well. "You're absolutely right, Gerald. It's essential that we advocate for reforms not only in policing, but also in the entire justice system. We need to work towards a system that values every individual's dignity and provides fair treatment." Inspired by Gerald's comments, Jonathan and his team began collaborating with legal aid organizations to raise awareness about the challenges faced by individuals navigating the legal system. They organized workshops that provided community members with information on their rights and resources available to them. As they expanded their focus, Jonathan also prioritized mental health initiatives, understanding that many individuals within the community struggle with issues that often went unaddressed. He reached out to local mental health professionals to discuss ways to integrate mental health resources into their community programs. Through these conversations, Jonathan learned about a program that offered mental health support for individuals involved with the criminal justice system. He envisioned a partnership that would provide access to counseling and therapy for those who needed it most, helping to break the cycle of trauma and violence. At a community meeting to announce this new initiative, Jonathan stood before a packed room, excited to share the news. "We're proud to announce a partnership with local mental health services to provide support for individuals in our community who may be struggling. This is an essential step in addressing the root causes of many of the challenges we face. The room erupted in applause, and Jonathan felt a sense of validation. Their efforts were resonating, and community members recognized the importance of holistic solutions that considered the complexities of their lives. As the initiatives continued to unfold, Jonathan found himself reflecting on the personal journey that had brought him to this point. From the traumatic experience of being wrongfully arrested to becoming a leading advocate for justice reform, he had witnessed the power of resilience and the importance of community solidarity. Through the ups and downs, Jonathan maintained a relentless commitment to the cause, recognizing that every step taken was part of a larger narrative of change. He was determined to honor the voices of those who had fought for justice before him, ensuring that their stories would not be forgotten. As the movement progressed, Jonathan knew that the real test of their efforts would come when they faced opposition again. He understood that systemic change often provoked resistance from those who feared losing power or influence. He braced himself for potential challenges, knowing that advocacy required strength and fortitude. As the community continued to engage in dialogue, Jonathan and his team were also preparing to take their message beyond the local arena. They sought to connect with other advocacy groups across the country, recognizing that their fight for justice was part of a broader movement. By sharing their experiences and learning from others, they hoped to amplify their impact and inspire change on a larger scale. They began organizing a conference that would bring together activists, community leaders, and policymakers to discuss strategies for reform and share best practices. The conference aimed to foster collaboration and solidarity among different movements, creating a network of advocates committed to social justice. As they planned the event, Jonathan felt a sense of excitement and anticipation. This conference could be a turning point, a chance to unite voices from different backgrounds and experiences in the pursuit of justice. He reached out to notable speakers, hoping to attract individuals who had made significant contributions to the fight for reform. In the weeks leading up to the conference, the momentum continued to build. They promoted the event through social media, flyers, and word of mouth, garnering attention from both local and national media. Jonathan received numerous inquiries from journalists eager to cover the event, highlighting the growing interest in their cause. On the day of the conference, the venue buzzed with energy. Activists from across the country gathered, sharing stories of their struggles and triumphs. Jonathan opened the conference with a heartfelt speech, emphasizing the importance of unity and collective action. "Today, we stand together as a testament to the power of community," he proclaimed, his voice ringing with conviction. "We are here not just to share our experiences, but to learn from one another, to build a movement that transcends borders and breaks down barriers." Throughout the conference, attendees engaged in workshops, panel discussions, and networking opportunities. Jonathan found himself inspired by the diverse perspectives and innovative solutions presented. Ideas flowed freely as activists shared successful strategies for community engagement, policy advocacy, and systemic reform. As the conference came to a close, Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The connections forged and knowledge gained would not only strengthen their local movement, but also ripple outward, inspiring others to join the fight for justice. Returning home, Jonathan and his team reflected on the momentum they had built. They knew that challenges still lay ahead, but they remained committed to their vision of a community grounded in justice, equity, and understanding. As they continued their work, Jonathan held on to the belief that every step forward, no matter how small, contributed to the larger narrative of change. He recognized that the journey would not be easy, but he was determined to face the challenges ahead with resilience and an unwavering commitment to the cause. The movement had become more than just an initiative. It was a living testament to the power of community, a reminder that together they could overcome adversity and pave the way for a more just and equitable future. And as Jonathan looked toward the horizon, he felt a profound sense of hope. Knowing that they were just getting started in their fight for justice and change, as the months rolled on, the impact of Jonathan's advocacy became increasingly visible in the community. The reforms were taking root, the initiatives were expanding, and trust between residents and law enforcement was beginning to flourish. Yet, Jonathan knew that sustaining this momentum would require ongoing effort, adaptability, and vigilance. One evening, after a long day of community meetings and workshops, Jonathan sat in his office, reflecting on the journey so far. He glanced at a bulletin board covered in photographs from their various events, smiling faces of community members and police officers interacting, children participating in sports days, and images from the conference. Each photo represented a step toward healing and unity. He felt proud but also aware of the work that remained. With a renewed sense of purpose, Jonathan called a team meeting. "I think it's time we evaluate how far we've come and set our sights on the future," he said, looking around at the familiar faces of his colleagues. "We need to discuss what's next for our movement. We can't become complacent." The team gathered their notes and began discussing their accomplishments and areas that still needed improvement. They reviewed the feedback they had received from the community, noting the significant decrease in complaints about police misconduct and the increasing attendance at community events. But they also recognized that some neighborhoods still felt neglected, and the fight for justice and equity was far from over. Jonathan listened as they brainstormed new initiatives aimed at deeper community engagement. "What if we started a youth leadership program?" he suggested. "We can empower young people to take active roles in their communities, teaching them advocacy skills and providing mentorship. This way, we're not just creating change for them, we're helping them become change makers." His team nodded in agreement, energized by the idea. They envisioned a program that would not only engage youth, but also ensure that the next generation had a voice in shaping the future of their community. They decided to pilot the program at local schools, recruiting students who showed interest in leadership and community service. As the program developed, Jonathan reached out to local schools to gauge interest. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and soon they were hosting workshops designed to build skills in public speaking, advocacy, and community organizing. The youth were eager to learn, excited to take on leadership roles that would empower them to affect change in their neighborhoods. The inaugural meeting of the Youth Leadership Program was held at the community center, and Jonathan was amazed at the turnout. Students filled the room, buzzing with energy and enthusiasm. They shared their ideas about what changes they wanted to see and discussed their hopes for the future. Jonathan stood at the front of the room, heart swelling with pride as he listened to their voices. "I want to create a safer environment for my younger siblings," one girl named Sophie said. "We need to feel secure walking home from school." Another boy, Eric, added, "I think we should have more activities for kids to do after school that would keep them out of trouble." Jonathan facilitated the discussion, encouraging them to think about actionable steps they could take. "This is your community, and your voices matter. Together, we can identify issues and work toward solutions that reflect your needs and aspirations." As the weeks passed, the program flourished, and the youth began to take ownership of their initiatives. They organized cleanup days, advocated for better recreational facilities, and even created a campaign to address bullying in schools. The energy was infectious, and Jonathan watched with admiration as the young leaders grew in confidence and agency. However, not all feedback was positive. Some members of the community remained skeptical of the changes, and a small faction of critics voiced their concerns about the movement's direction. They argued that the reforms were making it more difficult for police to do their jobs effectively, and they questioned whether the initiatives were really making a difference. Jonathan understood that dissent was a natural part of any movement. Rather than ignoring the criticism, he organized a town hall meeting to address these concerns directly. "We need to have an open dialogue about these issues," he told his team. "Let's invite everyone to share their perspectives. It's important that we hear from those who disagree with us." The town hall meeting was intense. Residents expressed their frustrations, sharing experiences that highlighted the complexity of the issues at hand. Jonathan listened attentively, ensuring that everyone had a chance to voice their thoughts. He encouraged a respectful exchange, allowing for different opinions while steering the conversation toward constructive solutions. At one point, an older man stood up and said, "I appreciate the work you're doing, but I don't see how this is making my neighborhood safer." I worry that these changes are just going to embolden criminals. Jonathan acknowledged the concern. I understand your fear and it's valid. But these reforms are about building trust and community. Safety comes from cooperation, not division. We want to work with you and find solutions that address your needs while also promoting justice and fairness. The meeting ended with a sense of openness, and Jonathan felt hopeful that even amidst dissent, progress was being made. The dialogue had allowed him to understand the fears and hopes of those who were hesitant about the movement. In the following months, the youth leadership program continued to grow, and Jonathan's efforts to bridge gaps in the community began to bear fruit. He organized joint events with local law enforcement, where police officers and community members could come together for activities like barbecues, movie nights, and sports tournaments. These events aimed to create a relaxed atmosphere where people could interact and build relationships outside the formal structures of authority. One evening at a barbecue, Jonathan watched as officers played basketball with neighborhood kids. Laughter echoed through the park, and he saw connections forming, barriers breaking down. He felt a surge of hope, realizing that these moments of genuine interaction were foundational to the long-term success of their efforts. As summer turned to fall, Jonathan began preparing for an upcoming community forum where they would evaluate the year's progress. He wanted to celebrate their achievements while remaining transparent about the challenges that still lay ahead. During the forum, Jonathan presented a report detailing the results of their initiatives. The room was filled with residents eager to learn about the impact of their collective efforts. Together, we have made significant strides in improving community police relations, he stated, showcasing statistics that indicate a decline in complaints and increased community engagement. But we must acknowledge that we still have work to do. This is just the beginning. He opened the floor for discussion, encouraging attendees to share their thoughts on the next steps. The atmosphere was charged with enthusiasm as residents offered suggestions and ideas. They spoke about expanding youth programs, improving mental health resources, and continuing to advocate for systemic change. By the end of the forum, a palpable sense of unity filled the room. Jonathan could see that their collective vision for a better community was shared by many. He closed the meeting by expressing gratitude for everyone's contributions. This movement is powered by each of you. Your voices matter, and together we will continue to strive for justice and equity. As he walked home that evening, Jonathan felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey had been fraught with challenges, but the progress they had made was undeniable. He knew that while the road ahead might be long, they were moving in the right direction. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan continued to reflect on the importance of resilience and hope. He understood that the fight for justice was an ongoing struggle, one that required commitment and courage from all those involved. Yet he also knew that they were not alone in this fight. With each step forward, each conversation held, and each relationship built, they were redefining the narrative in their community. Together, they were crafting a future rooted in understanding, compassion, and justice, an outcome that had once felt distant but was now within their grasp. And so, with a heart full of determination and hope, Jonathan prepared for the next chapter of their journey, knowing that together, they could create lasting change. As he watched the sun set over the community he loved, he felt a renewed sense of purpose and an unshakable belief that their efforts would pave the way for a brighter, more equitable future for all.